Hello, this is Elijah, and today we'll be looking at environmental trauma and Adlerian neuropsychology, diverting the criminal pathway through enhanced social interest and community healing. So, hello everyone, and thank you for being here today. I'll be exploring how environmental trauma intersects with psychology and neuroscience, and how Adlerian theory offers a powerful healing-centered response to trauma and criminal behavior. We'll look at how adverse social environments affect the brain and the behavior, and why building community and purpose can then reroute people from antisocial paths towards resilience and growth. And today we'll be talking about systemic and historical oppression and Adlerian psychology strength-based community and its lens, and then also neurobiology and the insight into how chronic trauma changes the brain. We'll examine how chronic stress, specifically from systemic injustices, engages the stress response systems, alters the brain structure, like the amygdala, the hippocampus, and it impairs its emotional regulation. Then we'll shift to the Adlerian framework, which sees behavior as purposeful and healing as rooted in belonging and social interest. Together, these perspectives will lead to crucial reframing. What looks like criminal or antisocial behavior oftentimes is a survival strategy shaped by a toxic environment. Now, first we need to be defining environmental trauma. Environmental trauma goes beyond individual experiences like abuse or neglect. It stems from chronic stress caused by systemic and historical inequities. This could include poverty, under-resourced schools, housing instability, community violence, environmental toxins, limited health access, and these conditions, they don't just affect individuals, they impact entire communities over time. Groups exposed to these stressors, such as Native American people, African Americans, and refugees, or some socio-economic underprivileged Caucasians, well, with the exceptions to them, they carry what researchers call historical trauma, collective trauma which is experienced by whole identity groups and transmitted across generations. So this trauma isn't just psychological, it's structural. The systems that create and maintain poverty, segregated and underfunded schools, unstable housing, and unstable neighborhoods, as well as toxic environments and barriers to healthcare, they become part of the environment that shapes development, opportunity, and well-being. So if these are underfunded, that also then kind of cuts down on this opportunity and the well-being and the development. These structures harm and produce biological consequences. Descendants of communities exposed to these chronic stressors, they show higher rates of stress-related illnesses such as mental illnesses, challenges, and altered stress regulation, like disrupted cortisol levels. So to truly understand trauma, especially in relation to behaviors like criminality or antisocial behavior, we must then connect systemic injustice, biological stress responses, and adaptive psychological strategies. Trauma isn't only personal, it's environmental, generational, and it's also embedded in the world that we live in. Now, let's look at the Adlerian psychology here. So, in the Adlerian framework, I think that it is uniquely qualified or suited for this challenge. Adler's individual psychology, for example, emphasizes 5 key concepts that kind of form the backbone of the strength-based responses to trauma. The first one is social interest, which is the drive to connect and contribute to others. Holism, which is the unity of mind, body, and social context. Lifestyle, the core belief systems developed by someone at an early age. And then teleology is the idea that behavior is goal-directed. And lastly, soft determinism, which is the belief that while we are influenced by our surroundings, we're not imprisoned by them or by our genes or by our past, and that we can kind of choose the future that we want to have. For Adler, healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's more about empowering the individual to rewrite their story and then realign their goals and reconnect to a more meaningful role in a community setting. Now let's dig a little bit deeper into these Adlerian concepts here. If we take a closer look, social interest or Gemeinschaftsgefühl in German is it's central. It's a sense of empathy, mutual responsibility, and for Adler, healthy development means growing in connectedness and not just personal achievement. On the other hand, though, lack of social interest correlates with narcissism, delinquency, or criminal behavior. Research shows that many individuals in prison report to have histories of isolation, rejection, and social disconnection. And Adler also emphasizes holism is people can't be split into mind, or it can be split into body only, or self versus their environment. Everything is connected. So trauma isn't just in the brain. It's in the communities, trauma is in the policies, and trauma is in the history. Now, then there's lifestyle. In our early formed life plan, for example, a child growing up in violence may adopt beliefs like people can't be trusted or power protects me, which guides future behavior. And lastly, we'll look at teleology and self-determinism. This reminds us that every behavior, even the harmful ones, serves some sort of purpose. This can be protection, belonging, or control. This isn't about excusing harmful behavior, but it's more about understanding that it is adaptive, so we can intervene constructively. Now, let's look at the neurobiology of trauma. We're going to shift to the brain. Chronic trauma activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis, and it basically is called the central stress system of the brain and the body. Over time, chronic trauma rewires the brain. So continuous biochemical stress floods the brain with cortisol and I guess also other stress hormones, which begins to reshape the core of the core brain structures. So, for example, the hippocampus is responsible for memory, learning, and some other things that I just forgot about. But it starts to shrink, and I found a study with Vietnam War twins, and one of the siblings had PTSD, and the hippocampus shrank about 11% smaller than compared to his non-exposed brother. This highlights trauma's physical toll on the brain. And at the same time, the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, becomes overreactive. So this creates a heightened state of hypervigilance. And when the person is constantly scanning for danger, even in safe environments, a person might start using their threat mechanisms to defend themselves. Even there is no there is no war or there is no problem. And this isn't just emotional. It's also anatomical and biological. So these brain changes explain why trauma survivors may lash out, dissociate, or even shut down. And their nervous systems aren't broken. They're adapted to survive to survive under siege. So yet society often misreads these as survival responses as more a failure or criminal behavior, overlooking the deeper neurobiological roots of trauma. Now let's move on to what the prefrontal cortex has to do with this. The prefrontal cortex is another key area which is deeply affected by trauma, and it is also the brain's executive functioning center. So the region is responsible for planning, impulse control, decision making, and empathy. These are the very functions that support also healthy pro-social behavior. So, but under chronic stress, the prefrontal cortex suffers more. It begins to lose gray matter, and it weakens its connection to deeper emotional structures like the amygdala. As a result, the brain's ability to actually regulate emotions and and its reactions become impaired. So this leads to a range of behavioral effects, including reduced ability to pause and reflect, or increased emotional reactivity, as well as difficulty to regulate fear and anger. So, in other words, when we actually see someone acting impulsive, aggressive, or non-compliant, we may actually be witnessing the neurobiological fallout of trauma, not an intentional defiance or moral failure. It's not really a choice, it's a survival adaptation that people have learned over time. However, the hopeful truth is that the brain remains plastic, which means that it is capable of change. So, within the introduction of safe environments and supportive relationships, these neural pathways can start to begin to heal and restore the very functions that trauma has disrupted. Okay, well, let's look at reframing this antisocial behavior here. This brings us to this vital reframe. Rather than asking, what's wrong with this person, we should actually be asking, what happened to this person and how did they adapt? Criminal behavior or antisocial behavior is often maladaptive. It's a maladaptive form of goal seeking safety, seeking power, seeking recognition, or belonging through distorted means. For instance, a gang may offer identity and protection. That's why somebody joins it. Aggression may become a shield against vulnerability, and dropping out of school may be a rational choice for somebody who feels unsafe or humiliated by the environment. And when we understand these acts as teleological, then we can design a response that addresses the underlying need instead of just punishing the surface behavior instead. Now let's look at the healing through social interest. Okay. Oh, and I think I forgot this slide here. Um, okay. Healing through social interest. Adler's offers not just a diagnosis, but a prescription. And that prescription is to build social interest. Particularly, this means that a mentorship program, restorative justice circles, community service, and culturally grounded healing may be effective. So, when it comes to mentorship, programs that model empathy and responsibility, or restorative justice circles that create shared accountability and repair, community services that integrate into therapy to help individuals rediscover purpose, and culturally grounded healing that reaffirms identity and integrational resilience. So these approaches don't fix people, but they can connect them. They tell a new story, like you matter, you belong, or you have something to give. So neurobiologically, these interventions rewire the brain. Safe, consistent relationships rebuild the prefrontal cortex. Positive social feedbacks calms the amygdala, and meaningful engagement stimulates neuroplasticity. Now let's look at the case example here. Imagine that a community center in a high crime neighborhood exists, and instead of punishing youth for acting out, they're invited to join after school programs offering tutoring, arts, counseling, and peer leadership. So over time, a teen once labeled a problem by society becomes a mentor for younger kids, and they identify a shift, and then their goals shift, and their identity shifts as well. This is, as we speak, theological transformation in action, and it's also backed by data. For example, restorative justice has specific data. So 30 to 50% of fewer suspensions and more safety happens whenever whenever youth joins this restorative justice program. When it comes to mentorship, 46% fewer unexcused absences and 33% less truancy is the case. when it comes to trauma-focused CBT, the PTSD is also reduced. And when it comes to cultural healing and youth, major drops in depression and substance use occur, and 10 to 15% of decline in delinquency and better grades occur as well. So, these aren't just nice stories, they're evidence-based interventions that reflect Adlerian theory and the brain science alike. Now, this is the empirical support that I was just talking about here. I'll leave the slide up here for just a second. Okay, let's look at the conclusion here. Environmental trauma changes the body, the brain, and the behavior, but it does not direct destiny. So, by integrating Adlerian psychology, neurobiological science, and socio historical lenses, we can then reframe antisocial behavior as a public health crisis or a public health issue. What people need is not punishment, but it needs belonging, purpose, and support. And the call is clear. Let's build communities where empathy is molded and healing is possible, and everyone has a place to live in it. And this is my presentation for NASEP 2025. Thank you.